The smell of garlic and fresh basil filled the air as Diana wiped down another table at Romano's restaurant. Her feet were killing her, and she still had 3 hours left on her shift. This was her second job of the day, and tomorrow she'd be back at the coffee shop at 6:00 in the morning. But she couldn't complain. The tips here were good, and she needed every penny. Diana had been working at Romano's for 8 months. Now it was one of those fancy places where rich people came to eat expensive pasta and drink wine that cost more than she made in a week. The restaurant had dark wood tables, soft lighting, and paintings of the Italian countryside on the walls. But what caught Diana's attention every single day was the beautiful black piano sitting in the corner. Nobody ever played it, it just sat there looking perfect and untouched. The owner, Mr. Romano, had told her it was worth more than most people's cars. Sometimes when she was cleaning nearby tables, Diana would stare at those shiny black and white keys. Her fingers would start moving on their own like they were remembering something from long ago. You see, Diana used to play piano. She was actually really good at it too. When she was younger, her music teacher said she had a special gift. She could make the piano sing in ways that gave people goosebumps. Elena had big dreams back then. She wanted to go to music school and become a professional pianist. She practiced for hours every day, learning pieces that made other students struggle. But life had other plans. When Diana turned 18, her mom got sick, really sick. The doctor said she needed treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. Someone had to work to pay the bills, and Elena's dad had left when she was just a kid, so Elena put her dreams on hold and got a job. Then another job, then another. That was 6 years ago now. At 24, Elena's hands were rough from washing dishes and cleaning tables, instead of smooth from playing beautiful music. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself she'd go back to music someday, but someday felt further away. With each passing month on this particular Tuesday evening, Romanos was busier than usual. Diana was rushing between tables, taking orders, and serving food her back HHT, and she had sauce stains on her uniform, but she kept smiling. Good tips meant she could pay the electric bill on time this month. Then he walked in. Everyone in the restaurant seemed to notice him at the same time. He was tall, maybe in his 40s, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Diana made in 3 months. His hair was perfectly styled, and he had the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money behind him. Walked 3 other people in expensive clothes, all talking quietly among themselves. Diana recognized him immediately, not personally, but from the newspapers and TV. This was James Park, the guy who had started that big tech company when he was just 25. Now he was worth billions, the kind of person who bought entire buildings just because he could. The hostess rushed over to seat them at the best table in the house, the one by the window with a perfect view of the city lights. Diana watched as they settled in, already knowing she'd probably be serving them. The hostess always gave her the VIP tables because she was good at staying calm under pressure, sure enough. 5 minutes later, the hostess waved Diana over. Table 12 needs a server, she said with a knowing smile, and they look like big tippers. Elena straightened her shoulders and walked over to the table. James Park was talking about some business deal using words she didn't understand. The others were listening carefully, occasionally nodding or asking questions. When Diana approached their conversation, stopped. "Good evening, Anu," she said with her best customer service smile. "Welcome to Romanos. Can I start you off with something to drink?" James Park looked up at her, and for a moment Diana felt like he was seeing right through her. His eyes were sharp, the kind that missed nothing. "We'll have a bottle of your best red wine." He said something Italian as Diana took their drink order. She couldn't help but glance at the piano again. It was sitting there in its usual spot, silent and waiting for just a second. She imagined herself sitting at that bench, her fingers dancing across the keys the way they used to. She could almost hear the music in her head. When she looked back, she noticed James Park following her gaze toward the piano. Something flickered in his expression, but Diana couldn't tell what he was thinking. The rest of the evening went normally. Diana brought their wine, took their food orders, and made sure their glasses never stayed empty. The group talked about business, laughed at inside jokes, and ate their expensive meals. They were actually pretty nice, unlike some of the rude customers she'd dealt with over the years. But Diana kept catching James Park watching her, not in a creepy way, but like he was trying to figure something out. Every time she walked by their table, his eyes would follow her, and every time she glanced at the piano, she noticed him looking in that direction too. She was clearing their dessert plates when one of James's friends made a comment about the piano. Beautiful instrument. He said, shame nobody ever plays it. Most people can't handle a piano like that. James replied, his voice carrying across the restaurant. It takes real skill, real training. Diana's hands paused for just a moment as she stacked the plates she'd played on pianos, just like this one. In fact, she'd probably played pieces that would make these rich businessmen's heads spin. But that was a lifetime ago when she was a different person with different possibilities as she walked away from their table. Diana had no idea that her life was about to change forever. She had no idea that James Park had been watching her. Reactions, reading her body language, and forming a plan that would test everything she thought she knew about herself. The evening was winding down, but the real story was just beginning. Diana was wiping down the coffee machine when she heard James Park's voice get louder. She tried not to listen, but the restaurant was getting quieter as the night went on, and sound carried easily across the dining room. I'm telling you, Robert, most people just pretend to have talent. James was saying to one of his friends they watch a few YouTube videos and think they're experts. Robert, a shorter man with glasses, laughed. Come on, James, you're being too harsh. There's hidden talent everywhere if you know where to look. Hidden talent. James's voice had that tone rich people get when they think they know everything. Please, real skill. Takes years of training, expensive lessons, the right connections. You can't just stumble into it. Diana felt her jaw tighten. She'd heard this kind of talk before from customers who thought money was the only path to success. They had no idea what it was like to practice piano on a broken keyboard in a tiny apartment or to learn complicated pieces by watching free videos online because you couldn't afford a teacher. The third man at the table, someone James had called Mitchell, jumped into the conversation. What about that story we heard last week? The mechanic who could paint like Picasso, lucky exception. James waved his hand dismissively. I bet if you picked any random person in this restaurant right now, they couldn't do anything. Impressive. Take our waitress, for example. Diana's stomach dropped. She was standing close enough to hear every word, pretending to organize the silverware station. She seems nice enough, Robert said carefully. Nice, sure, but I guarantee she's never done anything that would make people stop and stare. No special skills, no hidden talents. Just another person working a regular job. Elena's hands were shaking now, but not from nervousness. She was angry, really angry. This man who had everything handed to him was sitting in his expensive suit, making judgments about people he didn't even know. Mitchell looked uncomfortable. James, maybe we should change the subject. But James was just getting started. You know what? Let's make this interesting. His voice got even louder, and Diana could see other diners starting to look over. I'll bet anyone at this table $1,000 that our waitress there has never touched that piano. Probably doesn't even know how to read music. $50. She warn. Diana's heart nearly stopped. That was more money than she made in 2 years. That was enough to pay for her mom's treatments, and maybe even go back to school. That's a lot of money for such a silly bet, Robert said quietly. It's not silly if I'm right, James replied. And I'm always right about these things. Diana couldn't take it anymore. Before she could stop herself, she was walking toward their table. Her feet moved on their own, carrying her across the restaurant floor. The anger in her chest was burning hot, but she kept her face calm. Excuse me, Shirwayi, she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. James looked up at her with that same sharp expression from earlier. Oh, you were listening. How long have you been standing there? Long enough. Diana replied, long enough to hear you making bets about people you don't know anything about. The table went quiet. Robert shifted in his seat, looking embarrassed. Mitchell stared at his wine glass. But James just smiled like he was enjoying this. Did I say something wrong? He asked, his voice dripping with fake concern. I was just having a friendly discussion with my colleagues about talent and training. You were making assumptions, Diana said, about me specifically. Was I wrong? James leaned back in his chair. Tell me, when was the last time you played piano? The question hit Diana like a punch to the stomach. When was the last time? It had been almost 2 years since she'd touched any keys. The old upright piano in her apartment had broken and she couldn't afford to fix it. She'd been too busy working, too tired to even think about music most days. But James didn't know that he didn't know about the years of lessons, the competition she'd won, the music school acceptance letter she'd never been able to use. He saw a waitress in a stained uniform and assumed that was all she'd ever been. I think, Diana said slowly, that you don't know as much as you think you do. James's friends were looking back and forth between them, like they were watching a tennis match. Other diners had stopped eating to listen. Even the kitchen staff had poked their heads out to see what was happening. Prove it, James said suddenly. What prove it? You think I'm wrong about you, show me. He gestured toward the piano. Play something, anything. If you can play even a simple song without making mistakes, I'll apologize and give you the biggest tip you've ever seen in your life. Diana's mouth went dry, and if I can't, then you admit I was right, and we can all go back to our evening. The restaurant was dead silent. Now Diana could feel dozens of eyes on her. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. This was crazy. She hadn't played in front of people in years. What if she messed up? What if her fingers didn't remember? What if James was right and she really had lost whatever talent she used to have? But then she thought about her mom lying in that hospital bed. She thought about all the bills piling up at home. She thought about the dreams she'd put away in a box and tried to forget. Most of all, she thought about James Park's smug face and his assumption that people like her didn't matter. Fine. She heard herself say, you want proof? I'll give you proof. Sorry. As Diana walked toward the piano, she had no idea that the next few minutes would change everything. She didn't know that someone in the restaurant was already pulling out their phone to record what was about to happen. She didn't know that her life was about to take a turn that would surprise everyone in that room, including herself. All she knew was that she was tired of being underestimated. Diana's legs felt like jelly as she walked toward the piano. Every step seemed to take forever, but at the same time she felt like she was moving too fast. The black piano got bigger and bigger as she got closer, and suddenly it looked huge, like a mountain. She had to climb. The restaurant was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. Forks had stopped clicking against plates. Conversations had died mid-sentence. Even the kitchen had gone silent. Diana could feel every single person in the room watching her, waiting to see what would happen next. She reached the piano bench and just stood there for a moment. Staring down at the keys, they were perfect and shiny. Not a fingerprint or speck of dust anywhere. This piano probably cost more than she'd make in 5 years of working at Romanos. Her hands were shaking. What if she'd forgotten everything? What if all those years of practice meant nothing now? It had been so long since she'd played anything harder than Happy Birthday on her phone's piano app. Behind her, she could hear James Park talking quietly to his friends. This should be interesting, he said, not even trying to lower his voice. I almost feel bad for her. That made Diana's anger flare up again. Almost feel bad. She turned around and looked straight at him. What exactly do you want me to play? James shrugged, like it didn't matter. Whatever you want. Something simple should be fine. Maybe Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star? His friends chuckled and Elena felt her cheeks burn. She turned back to the piano and slowly sat down on the bench. The seat was the perfect height, just like the one she used to practice on when she was younger. She adjusted it slightly and placed her feet on the pedals. Her muscle memory was kicking in even after all this time. Diana lifted her hands and held them over the keys for a terrifying moment. Her mind went completely blank. She couldn't remember a single song, not one. Her breathing got shallow and she started to panic. Then, like a whisper from the past, she heard her old piano teacher's voice in her head. When you're nervous, Diana, start with something that comes from your heart. Don't think about the technique, just feel the music. And suddenly she knew exactly what to play. Her fingers found the keys, and the first note rang out, clear and pure. It was Chopin's Minute Waltz. But Diana wasn't playing it fast and showy, like most people did. She played it slow and gentle, like a lullaby. Each note was perfect, precise, but full of emotion. The sound filled the restaurant like water filling a glass. Diana closed her eyes and let the music take over. Her fingers remembered everything, every scale, every chord progression, every delicate touch that made the difference between just hitting keys and making real music. As she played, something magical started happening. All the stress from her double shifts melted away. All the worry about bills and medical treatments faded into the background. For the first time in years, Diana felt like herself again. Not the tired waitress or the struggling daughter, but the musician she'd always been inside. The melody flowed from her fingers like it had been waiting there all along. she added. Her own little touches, a gentle trill. Here, a soft emphasis there. This wasn't just playing notes on a page. This was Diana telling her story through music. She could feel the energy in the room changing. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was the kind of silence you get when something beautiful is happening, when people are holding their breath because they don't want to miss a single moment. Diana opened her eyes and saw that people at nearby tables had turned in their chairs to watch her. A woman at the corner table had tears running down her cheeks. An elderly man was nodding along with the rhythm, a soft smile on his face. But Diana wasn't done yet as the waltz came to an end. Instead of stopping, she smoothly transitioned into something else, something that would really show James Park what he was dealing with. Her fingers found the opening notes of Rick Maninov's piano, Concerto No. 2. It was one of the hardest pieces in classical music, something that professional pianists spent months learning. Diana had mastered it when she was 19, back when she thought she'd spend her life on concert stages instead of serving tables. The music exploded from the piano like a storm. Diana's hands flew across the keys, her fingers dancing through passages that would make most pianists sweat. But she wasn't just showing off. Every note carried the weight of her dreams, her sacrifices, her hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to be who she was meant to be. The restaurant was completely mesmerized. People had stopped pretending to eat. Servers had emerged from the kitchen and were standing along the walls, their mouths open in amazement. Even Mr. Romano, the owner, had come out of his office to see what was happening. Diana could see James Park in her peripheral vision. He wasn't laughing anymore. He wasn't talking to his friends or checking his phone. He was sitting perfectly still, staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. As the concerto built to its climactic moment, Diana poured everything she had into the music, all her frustration, all her love for her mother, all her buried dreams came flowing out through her fingertips. The piano sang and roared and whispered, telling a story that words could never capture. When she finally played the last note, the silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't empty or waiting. It was full of amazement, full of respect, full of the kind of awe that happens when you witness something truly extraordinary. Diana sat at the piano bench, her hands still resting on the keys, and waited. Her heart was pounding, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from the pure joy of making music again, of remembering who she really was. The applause, when it came, was thunderous. The applause seemed to go on forever. Diana sat at the piano bench, her hands still trembling from the performance, trying to process what had just happened. People were standing up from their tables, clapping so hard their hands must have hurt. She could hear voices calling out bravo and amazing from different corners of the restaurant. But Ella Nena couldn't take her eyes off James Park's table. The three men who had been so confident just minutes ago now sat in complete shock. Robert's mouth was hanging open like he'd forgotten how to close it. Mitchell was shaking his head slowly, like he couldn't believe what he'd just witnessed, and James was staring at her with an expression she'd never seen before. It wasn't the smug look from earlier, it wasn't embarrassment either, which is what Elena had expected. Instead, he looked almost impressed, maybe even a little ashamed. Diana stood up from the piano bench, her legs still shaky. The applause was finally starting to die down, but people were still staring at her. She felt exposed, like everyone in the room could see right through her. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to be invisible, just another waitress serving food and cleaning tables. Diana, Mr. Romano's voice boomed across the restaurant. The owner was pushing through the crowd of diners, his face red with excitement. "Diana, my dear girl, why didn't you tell me you could play like that?" Diana opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. How could she explain that she'd been hiding this part of herself for so long that she'd almost forgotten it existed before she could figure out what to say? James Park was walking toward her. His steps were slow and deliberate, like he was thinking carefully about every move. The restaurant gradually got quieter, as people realized something important was about to happen. James stopped a few feet away from Diana, up close. She could see that his sharp businessman expression had completely disappeared. He looked human, maybe even a little vulnerable. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the quiet restaurant. "A big one." Elena crossed her arms, trying to protect herself from whatever was coming next. "Do you Yes, James ran a hand through his perfect hair, messing it up for the first time all evening. What I said earlier about you, about people like you, I was completely wrong. People like me. Diana's voice had an edge to it that made several nearby diners lean in closer. James winced. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I meant I thought I knew everything about success, about talent, about what it takes to be exceptional. I thought it was all about money and connections and the right opportunities. He gestured toward the piano. But what you just did, that wasn't just talent. That was years of training, of dedication, of real passion. And you've been carrying that around inside you while working two jobs and dealing with whatever challenges life has thrown at you. Diana felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She wasn't going to cry in front of all these people. You don't know anything about my challenges. You're right, James said simply. I don't, but I'd like to. The restaurant was so quiet now that Diana could hear the kitchen's refrigerator humming in the background. Everyone was watching this conversation like it was a movie, but Diana barely noticed them anymore. All her attention was focused on this man who had gone from insulting her to what exactly was he doing. When I was your age, James continued, I played piano too. Not like you just did. I was never that good, but I loved it. I spent hours practicing, dreaming about maybe playing professionally someday. Diana wasn't expecting this. What happened, life happened, business school, then my first startup, then success, then more success. I told myself I didn't have time for music anymore, that it wasn't practical. He looked toward the piano with something that might have been sadness. I haven't touched a piano in 15 years. So why did you say those things about me? Diana asked about people not having real talent. James was quiet for a long moment because it's easier to believe that talent is rare and special than to admit you gave up on something you loved. Because if people like you exist, people who kept their gifts alive despite everything, then maybe I made the wrong choice. The honesty in his voice surprised Diana. This wasn't the arrogant businessman from earlier. This was someone who suddenly seemed very tired and very human. Look, James said, reaching into his jacket pocket. I made a bet earlier, and I lost fair and square. He pulled out his wallet and started counting bills. I promised you the biggest tip you'd ever seen if you could play without making mistakes. Diana watched as he counted out $100 bills, more money than she usually made in a month. But something about this didn't feel right. I don't want your money, she said quietly. James stopped counting and looked up at her. What I didn't play to win your bet. I played because Diana paused trying to find the right words. Because I needed to remember who I am. Not just the waitress or the daughter taking care of her sick mom, but the musician, the person who can make something beautiful even when everything else is falling apart. The tears she'd been holding back finally started to fall. I haven't played like that in 2 years. I thought maybe I'd lost it forever. James slowly put his wallet back in his pocket. When he looked at Ella Nena again, there was something different. In his eyes, something that looked almost like respect. You didn't lose anything, he said softly. You just buried it for a while, but it was always there waiting. Diana wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, not caring that her makeup was probably smeared now. Around them, the restaurant was still silent, still watching, still waiting to see what would happen next. But Diana had a feeling that the real surprise was yet to come. James stood there for a moment looking like he was having some kind of internal battle with himself. Diana could see his mind working, calculating something, but this time it didn't feel cold or businesslike. It felt different, Diana, he said finally. Can I ask you something personal? She nodded, still wiping tears from her cheeks. Why are you working here? I mean, with talent like that, you should be performing on stages, not serving tables. The question hit Diana like a slap. It was the same question she asked herself every night when she got home exhausted from her double shifts. Life isn't that simple, she said quietly. But it could be, Diana looked at him suspiciously. What do you mean? James glanced around the restaurant. People were still watching them, still listening to every word. Maybe we should talk somewhere more private, he said. Mr. Romano appeared beside them, his face glowing with pride. Diana, take all the time you need. Your shift is covered, he turned to James, sir. You can use my office if you'd like. 5 minutes later, Elena found herself sitting across from James Park in Mr. Romano's small office behind the kitchen. The walls were covered with pictures of the restaurant's history, family photos and certificates from the health department. It felt surreal, like she was living someone else's life. James leaned forward in his chair. Tell me about your mom. Diana's eyes widened. How did you... When someone plays music with that much emotion, there's usually a story behind it. And you mentioned taking care of your sick mother earlier. Diana took a deep breath. She has cancer. The treatments aren't covered by insurance and they're expensive, really expensive. That's why I work two jobs. That's why I gave up music school. I got accepted to Juilliard when I was 18, full scholarship for the first year. Diana's voice got quieter, but then Mom got diagnosed and someone had to work. Dad left when I was little, so it was just me. James was quiet for a long time. Diana could hear the distant sounds of the restaurant dishes clinking, people talking, normal life continuing, while her world felt like it was hanging in the balance. How much, James asked. Suddenly, how much do you need for your mother's treatments? I mean, Diana's heart started racing. Why are you asking that? Just tell me. I don't know exactly. Maybe $200. Or for everything she needs. Diana felt embarrassed saying such a huge number out loud. James nodded like she just told him the price of a cup of coffee. And if money wasn't an issue, what would you want to do with your life? Diana stared at him. This conversation was getting stranger by the minute. I'd want to finish music school. Maybe teach piano to kids who can't afford lessons. Maybe perform. Sometimes she paused, but that's just a dream now. What if it wasn't before Diana could ask what he meant? James pulled out his phone and started making a call. Jennifer, it's James. I need you to look into something for me. He covered the phone and whispered to Diana, what's your mother's name? And which hospital? Diana told him, feeling like she was in a dream. James relayed the information to whoever Jennifer was, then hung up. What are you doing? Diana asked. I'm going to pay for your mother's treatment, all of it. Diana's mouth fell open. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. And that's not all, James. Leaned back in his chair. My company has a foundation that supports arts education. We give scholarships to talented musicians who need help getting their careers started. I want to offer you a full scholarship to whatever music school you choose, plus living expenses. Diana felt dizzy. Why would you do that? Because an hour ago I was sitting in that restaurant thinking I had life figured out, thinking that success was just about money and business deals. But you reminded me that there are things in this world more important than profit margins. James's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and smiled. Jennifer works fast. Your mother's medical bills will be taken care of by tomorrow morning. Diana started crying again, but this time they were different tears. I don't understand. This is too much. I can't accept this. Why not? Because people don't just do things like this, not for strangers. James was quiet for a moment. Diana, do you know how much money I spent on my last car? She shook her head. $500,000 for a car that sits in my garage most of the time. He looked directly at her tonight. You gave me something I haven't felt in 15 years. You reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. You showed me what real talent looks like, what real dedication means. Diana was still crying, but she was also starting to smile. I can't give you back the years you lost, James continued, but I can make sure you don't lose any more. Your mom will get the best treatment available and you'll get the education you deserve. But what if I'm not good enough? What if I've been away from music too long? James smiled. Did you hear yourself play tonight? Diana, you're not just good enough, you're extraordinary. 6 months later, Diana walked through the doors of the Manhattan School of Music as a fully funded student. The video of her performance at Romano's had gone viral, with millions of people sharing the story of the waitress who amazed a billionaire. But Diana barely paid attention to the fame. She was too busy living her dream. Her mother was cancer-free, sitting in the front row of Diana's first official recital. James Park was there too, along with Mr. Romano and all her former co-workers from the restaurant. But the person Elena was playing for was herself, the girl who had never stopped believing that music could change everything. As her fingers found the keys that night, Elena knew that sometimes the most impossible dreams are just waiting for the right moment to come true.